All right, so this is going to be a quick screencast covering incomplete dominance and codominance specifically so that you can do the first 4 pages in the packet of crosses that you got. So first let's look at incomplete dominance. So we know that the whole entire world just isn't tall and short and purple and white flowers. There is cases where we have blending or a in-between color. For example, these flowers, okay, here we have a red flower, here we have a pink, this would kind of be our in-between, and then here we have our white. So the definition in the book says incomplete dominance in which a heterozygous phenotype is somewhere between the two homozygous phenotypes. Neither allele is completely dominant nor completely recessive. So a lot of times in plants we do see this. So let's go ahead and look at the packet, and I'm going to do the first problem as an example. Alright, so if we read through the very top, it says among certain flowers the allele for red flowers is dominant to the allele for white. So we still have red being dominant, but we're going to use a different notation. We're going to use R1 as being our red allele, and white flowers is going to be R2, and those are going to be recessive. Okay? Going on in the paragraph here, it says the gene that controls this trait shows incomplete dominance where pink flowers are caused by the heterozygous condition. Use R1 for the red allele and R2 for the white allele. So how these two alleles end up making our three possible phenotypes again, if you have R1, you are going to have red flowers. If you have R1, R2, that is going to be your heterozygous, one of each, and that is going to be your pink. And R2, two of the recessives, that is going to give you the white. So in the first problem, it says a pink flower, so we know pink is going to be R1, R2, I'm going to write down that parent's genotype, is crossed with another pink flower. All right. What are the possible genotypic and phenotypic ratios for their offspring? So if we do this Punnett Square, I'll do it over in this corner here. R1, R2. You're going to set up the Punnett Square the same. R1, R2. One parent's alleles are going to go along the top. The other parent's possible alleles are going to go along the bottom. And then looking at the offspring, R1, they could have one red so far. They could have a pink. They could have another pink. And they could potentially have a white flower. Okay? So our genotypes, we are going to write down all the genotype combinations that we see. R1 is 25%. R1, R2, there's 2 out of the 4, so that's going to be 50%. And lastly, R2 is going to be 25%. So again, we're just building on what we already know about genetics and crosses, phenotype, genotype, all that stuff is exactly the same. Now you just need to pay, I think, closer attention to what these genotypes actually translate into phenotypes. So if we look at our phenotypic ratio, the phenotypic ratio is going to be, this one is going to be white. No, sorry, red. My bad. Red, 25%. Pink is going to be 50%. And white is going to be 25%. So the heterozygous is going to be a different phenotype than what we typically saw when we were doing the complete dominance problems. So that is how you do an incomplete dominant cross. Continue on and finish problems 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right, so codominance is the last example I want to do on this screencast. From the book, it says sometimes both alleles of a gene are expressed completely. Neither allele is dominant nor recessive. In this case, alleles show codominance in which both traits are fully and separately expressed. So one of the big examples for codominance is the roan color in horses and cows. I have a couple pictures of horses. So this is a beautiful looking horse. It is kind of this, actually it's considered a roan horse. But if we zoom in, and I'll see that on the next slide, that it kind of from, standing further back, just kind of like looks this kind of reddish, not red like the mane, but when we zoom in, we're going to see that it's made up of individual red hairs and individual white hairs. Okay, so I'll show you that on the next slide. So we can see here when we zoom in, here are the individual red hairs, there's individual white hairs, and then when we pull back, it's not as apparent that it is the red hairs and the white hairs. It is more of kind of just that overall kind of rusty color. But upon closer look here, you can definitely see the red and the white. That's because these are codominant. Okay, codominant means that you're going to express both colors. White hairs are going to show up and red hairs are going to show up. I have one more example of a different color roan horse on the next slide. So here is this one, and you can imagine that when we kind of zoom in, we're going to see white hairs and black hairs. So this is another example of a roan horse, and I'll show you that, and then we'll get to a problem on the last slide. Here are the individual black and white hairs, codominance. Okay, so let's look at the problem set. The first one under codominance, so let's read the instructions. It says, in some horse breeds, the red coat color is dominant and others express the white coat color, which is also dominant. So we're going to have R, which is going to be red, and then we're also going to have W, which is going to be white. So this is the first time that we've seen using two different letters, and that's how we want to approach these codominant problems. Continuing on in the packet, it says in a heterozygous horse, RW. All right, so our genotypes for these horses, RR is going to be red, RW is going to be roan, and WW is going to be white. All right, so in a heterozygous horse, RW, both are expressed, and the horse has a roan coat and both red and white hairs. Cross two roan horses. What are the possible genotypic and phenotypic ratios for their offspring? So we're going to cross one roan horse with another roan horse. All right, so I'll do the Punnett Square over here again. RW, one parent's alleles on the top, the other parent's alleles here. RR is a possibility, RW is a possibility, RW is a possibility, and WW is a possibility. So when we look at the phenotypic and genotypic ratios, genotypes, again, write down the different genotypes that you see. RR is 25%, RW is 50%, and WW is 25%. Phenotypes, what do they actually look like? Well, the RR is going to be red. There's going to be 25% of them that are red. RW is going to be our roan color because they have one of each of the dominant alleles. That's 50%. And lastly, white is going to be 25%. So again, just keeping track of what your letters are representing and making sure that you're using two capital letters that are different capital letters for codominant problems. So go ahead and finish problems 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 under the codominant section.